Back in 1989-90, I did a course with Windy Dryden. You might have seen some of his books around, something like 200 books he's written on cognitive approaches to counselling and psychotherapy. And that was an aha moment for me in terms of the work I was doing with people at that time, counselling work. And it's following that course I did, and various bits of reading I'll mention at some stage, that I got developing something which grew into like the space model in its current form. So it's got a history going back to around about 1990, something in that period. So let's start with some general ideas, because I know some of you like using grow models and traditional coaching. And everything I've got to say this afternoon, and other times too, is not to undermine grow or conventional coaching at all, because you can go a long way with it. But really, things like grow run out of steam, and the question is, what do you do when it's run out of steam? If you review the literature of traditional coaching, most of it suggests that the client needs to have a goal. And if your client hasn't got a goal, what do? You normally do something like a life audit or work away and try and help them get goals. So implicit in the process is the idea is people should have goals or have some direction that they're moving in. And that's implicit in the basic literature on coaching. And a lot of coaches think that that's where the big work is in coaching, helping people be clear about what their goals are, and stop living lives in an accidental way, stop living your life as a habit, but think about how could you develop, how could you change, and what's your current goal that you might be moving towards. And then having helped the person develop those goals, much of the traditional coaching process is then about developing action plans that will move the person towards their goal. So does this make sense to you? A quick resume of summary of basic coaching. And then we can ask some hard-nosed questions like, does it work? And there's plenty of examples that it does work, but we can then ask the more sophisticated question, does it always work? Does it invariably work? And in your experience using things like Grow and other conventional coaching models, does it always work? No. And when it's not working, when it is working, wonderful, no need to get space models out or anything else. Keep working with it, super. But when it isn't working, what sorts of things get in the way of this process here? What cuts across the action plan and all the rest of that?
Well, there's something in usually something in the individual that says, actually, that's not really what I'm interested in. But I'm not going to say anything because we're all going down this goal-orientated route, and isn't it great?
Yes.
That's my organisation's experience of it.
Right. So they then question the goals, and do we need to have goals? And other people had some ideas here?
I thought thoughts and emotions gets in the way.
Yeah, so thoughts. What sorts of thoughts?
Negative thoughts that you might have.
I can't do it. I'm not good enough. Those kind of thought processes. You see, and traditional coaching hasn't got much to offer to counter those kinds of thoughts. And emotions, what kind of emotions get in the way?
Fear.
Fear. And related to fear, we've got anxiety. And again, if you look at the traditional literature on coaching, one word is absent, and that is emotion. And it's just amazing to my way of thinking that we can be coaching people and not be interested in their emotion, and not be using models that relate to their emotion.
So with emotion then, there's also life and stuff.
Yes. So what sort of aspect of
Well,
life?
there might be a crisis or a bereavement or a redundancy or, you know...
So the situations out there... Yeah. That's right. So there are two categories. There are things within us that can disturb us moving towards our goals, and there are things outside us that we have little influence over that might Excuse me, I'm just getting over a coldy thing here. Lots of vestiges around. So what else in this category over here can get in the way of somebody using, say, grow?
Somebody's own motivation.
Yeah, motivation.
Previous experiences.
Yes. Other things? Confidence level? Yeah. Things to do with self, like self-esteem, self-confidence, self-efficacy, if you like those kind of words. Various aspects of self.
And I think a lot of this is hidden as well. People are often in a management climate where actually you want to talk about positive, we don't want to talk about problems, we want to talk about challenges and opportunities. And people are not comfortable with talking about any of these negative things.
No, that's right. So there could be embarrassment and shame. Shame is and embarrassment. They're both interesting emotions because we look at the cognitive dynamics of those. It's normally, if other people knew, they would judge me badly. So I better not tell other people. And that just doesn't help at all. So shame is a good example of an emotion that gets in the way of people sharing what's going on with for themselves with other people and making some progress with it.
It's the phonyism one, isn't it? Because it's quite prevalent that people think that they've got the position but they don't really deserve it. And if you open up to this kind of stuff, you're sort of saying, you know, in people's minds, they might be saying, hey, look, I don't deserve it, look, here's the evidence.
Yes, yeah. Did you say phonyism?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And you find that in people learning about coaching too. People say, well, I've done the courses, I've done 2 of the courses now, but I'm not a real coach, not like those over there. I've got my diploma now, I've got my certificate, but I'm not a real coach yet. I've got a master's degree now in coaching, but I'm not a real coach. What does it take to be a real coach? It's really, really interesting.
Vulnerability?
Yeah, feeling vulnerable, yeah. And so when we haven't got much time, so I'm going to sort of truncate the process here. But when we start to list out these things, I think you'll agree that you begin to see loads of things that traditional coaching doesn't offer us a way forward with. Is that fair? And if you look at this basic model up here, clarify your goals, well, that's a good idea, and let's have an action plan. What would you need to do to get to your goal? But it doesn't deal with emotions and motivation and self-confidence and all these kind of things. So what I would suggest then is that we need models that would help us deal with these things to add to otherwise really good models like Grow and all the rest of it in the traditional coaching. And you can see where I'm coming from now is that we want space, yes, but ideas taken from CBC or CBT are really great. Let's just deal with that one quickly. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, has been around now for quite a while. I'll be giving you a handout later on. You see the main references date from 1962, 63, the 1970s. So cognitive behaviour therapy has been around for quite a long time now. And cognitive behavioural coaching is a more recent term. And the idea is to take some of the ideas from CBT, the therapy, and apply them to people who are not so seriously disturbed. Does that make sense? And so it's the same stuff. It's just if you read a book on the coaching, the examples in it would be not so severe as the examples in a therapy book. But the models and the method of working is exactly the same.
And when would you date that, the CBC?
Much more recent. And of course, some of the basic ideas from cognitive behavioural therapy are really useful in coaching, looking at the way people think and how that relates to their emotion and how that relates to their behaviour. And we've got writers that I'll just mention briefly. You've got Albert Ellis, that you might look at if you're interested in the history here, and Aaron Beck are the 2 forefounders. And a load of other people I mentioned here, but I won't have time for those. And all good stuff. Now, those people I've mentioned there, Ellis and Beck, they're primarily cognitive therapists. They then rediscovered behaviour therapy and retitled themselves cognitive behaviour therapists. But their main thrust is the cognitive bit. Sounds awfully pompous, doesn't it? What's meant by the word cognition or cognitive? Do we know? Thought. Yes. What on earth don't we call it just thought? Probably because there's a bit more to it. So it's thought, yes. What else?
Perception.
Perceptions, yes, that's really good.
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
The feelings that come from thoughts.
Not so much the feelings, that would be the emotional side, but it's about the beliefs, it's about evaluations. Somebody was saying as they walked past me, there's no signal here. And I sort of rather jokingly said that might be a good thing. There's no signal for your mobile phone. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Depends on what you want to achieve, doesn't it? If you want some peace, it might be a great thing. No reception, can't get any calls. So what's the evaluation of the situation? Evaluations is really important. Anticipations, what you expect is going to happen. Values. Images. Images are really important because people think, if you think you've got to do something, you've got to say, address the board of a big company. What's your imagery? And it could be, and a lot of people are looking around interested when you've got to say your little piece, or it could be a bunch of people who are going to attack you. And what do you see in your mind's eye when you think about addressing the board? And that's really interesting. And people can disturb themselves, as we'll see with an example later on, with imagery. And because cognition involves all of these things, that's why we tend to continue to use this word cognition. In fact, thoughts and thinking would be a much simpler word to use. That makes sense? So there we go. So let's move into the space one. And if I'm working with a client, let's get practical quite quickly. I normally just write it quite quickly like this: S-P-A-C-E, and then start drawing in lines between them and put a ring around that. And that's what I would draw in front of a client if I was going to get into space work myself. And then, of course, I would need to explain to the client what each of the things mean. So, particularly in the first session, I would then write in social context here. The P stands for physiology. And in doing that, I was following Ellis, because Ellis uses the word physiology. But it's another uncomfortable word, isn't it, really? How's your physiology this morning, darling? I mean, so physical fits better. So physical and physiological. What's going on in your body, basically. The A stands for actions. Yeah, that's really good. Which is the same as the behaviour, the observable behaviour. What is the person doing or not doing? What is their behavioural tendency? Somebody might be highly anxious in a meeting and their tendency might be to run out and go home. But the social pressure might be, I can't do that. So they don't do that. Procrastination. Does anybody in the room ever procrastinate? So procrastination is an inactivity, we could see, but it would still go down as an action or inaction. Make sense? So, and then C we've got here cognitions. And then E stands for emotion. So if you think back to what we were looking for here, fears and anxiety and so on, we've got our emotion. Our thoughts, so the cognitions, our experience, well, that's memories, that's a cognitive bit. Views of self, normally seen as a cognitive bit as well. And you see, so all these bits we're looking for map quite nicely onto the space diagram. And that then gives us a model that we can be using with a client, which will prompt us to explore and deal with these different aspects, which otherwise could have got lost. Does that make sense?